Story 1. I quit a job because there was a deceased person in the back, and I did not want to clean up the mess after the emergency responders left. Story 2. My first job was at a fast food restaurant. I left because the smell of grease followed me everywhere, even in my dreams. Story 3. I worked at Amazon for 3 days before quitting. After that third day, my feet were bleeding, and I could not walk on them for the next few days. The quitting process was really easy. I just pressed the resign button on the app they had us download and answered a few questions about why I wanted to quit. Story 4. I kept score and swept the floor at recreational league basketball games. I left because it paid $5.15 and Walmart was paying $6.40. Story 5. I worked at a carnival as a target for people to shoot paintballs at. I left because I became tired of being hit by paintballs. Story 6. I was a courtesy clerk, also known as a bagger, cart getter, and someone who puts items back, at a grocery store making minimum wage. I was going to school at the time, so I could only work part-time. I worked there during the busy holiday season, but a few people had quit, and we were short-staffed. They made me work almost full-time, which I couldn't do because of school. I told the manager to lower my hours or I would leave, and I eventually left. Story 7. I worked at a department store. I took a cooperative learning course in school and had to take a different type of job to qualify for credit. Story 8. The software engineer company first asked me to work for 10 to 11 hours and required me to work on weekends while I was studying for my master's degree. I quit a week later. Story 9. I worked at a frozen yogurt shop for a summer. One day, the owner texted me, "Don't worry about your shift." I closed the business. I never heard from him again. My coworker said she was going to pursue legal action because he ran off without giving her the last paycheck. Story 10. It was a temporary position. I stayed for nearly 3 years because the woman I replaced took the opportunity to have a second child since she was not needed at work immediately. Eventually, I had to leave. In my next job, I replaced a woman who had retired. She did not transition well into retirement, so we had to bring her back to do some extra small tasks for us, as her husband requested that we provide her with something to do. Story 11. I had 3 jobs at the same time during high school, and I quit 2 of them, one in fast food and one as a lifeguard, due to unnecessary stress. I didn't want to work myself to death before reaching adulthood, but I worked as much as possible to survive. Story 12. Little Caesars. One day, when it was slow, they wanted me to wash dishes, but I was 15 and thought I was too good to wash dishes like some peasant, so I walked out. Story 13. My first real job was at Burger King for 4 months. My mom convinced me to apply because they were understaffed at the time. Story 14. McDonald's in high school. Once I graduated and received my diploma, my dad helped me secure a part-time job doing data entry and managing the file room at his company. The pay was better, and the working conditions were much more relaxed. This was my college job for about a year until I finished helping them digitize all their paper files. Story 15. It was a pool store and hydraulics shop in Southeast Ohio, owned and operated by a local couple. On the same day, I installed a pool liner while assisting with bobcat repairs and managing O-ring inventory. The owner was from West Virginia and graciously flew us to breakfast from the local airport. He was a very generous man. I left because I relocated. Story 16. My first job was part-time as a junior 3D modeler. I studied computer science at university and could not afford a full-time job. I left because the company did not pay me for 3 months and, in the end, only gave me $50. Life feels unfair when you are young and eager to work. Story 17. I worked for my uncle who owned an onion growing and harvesting company. I thought I would be driving a tractor or doing something cool. Instead, I spent 12 hours a day doing field work in temperatures exceeding 90 degrees, which was not part of the field worker's contract. It was brutal, and my brother and I quit after the first week. The $200 check bounced when I cashed it. Thanks, Uncle Chris. I would do it all again if you were back with us. The next year, I went to work for another uncle in maintenance at a national park. It was the best summer job I ever had over 5 years. Story 18. Bebop's Drive-In in Greensboro, North Carolina. I left because I was 15 and wanted to play more than I wanted to go to prom. Story 19. I was a pizza delivery driver and cook. I quit when they called me to work on Christmas Eve after approving my day off a month earlier. Story 20. Walmart online grocery. The biggest reason is that if I stay in one job too long, I get really depressed. There were other reasons, including the pain and short staffing, but I can't handle working in one place too long unless I actually like the work I'm doing. I moved to the in-store deli after a year, and I also dislike this job now. Story 21. I worked at Park Lane Hosiery. A man would call frequently and ask if we sold crotchless pantyhose and if I could model them. I was 16 at the time and my parents made me quit. I had no idea what it all meant. Story 22. I left the call center for Seats Kmart when they stopped accommodating my college schedule, and then it closed about 2 months later. Story 23. Wendy's. I left due to management for a job paying 50 cents more. I have worked 8 jobs since then, and to this day it was the worst job I had. It gave me trust issues with future employers and made me believe high stress was normal. Even customers went out of their way to complain about the manager. The manager was always yelling, aggressive, and rude to customers with wrong orders. The most significant issue was that the manager stole money and then blamed the 3 cashiers working that day, including me. Story 24. I worked as a janitor in a paper mill for $20 a month when I was 10 years old. I think it's quite clear why I left. I am also slightly allergic to paper dust. Story 25. My first real paying job was at a movie theater tearing tickets. It was an easy job. I only had to sweep a small area after the crowd moved into the theater. I enjoyed flirting with the girls at the concession counter, consuming all the popcorn and soda I wanted, and watching all the movies for free. I received a paycheck every week. I left that job when I went off to college. Story 26. I taught Native American children during summer school. It was enjoyable, and we completed various projects. The program ended due to a lack of funding. Story 27. I left my first job twice. It was my family's business. The first time I left was because I could no longer tolerate my mother's abuse. I returned a few years later after she retired. The second time I left was because we closed the business for good. Story 28. Cleaning out ditches on a farm from around 10 to 15. I cut that side of the family out of my life as soon as I could at 15. Story 29. Bagging groceries and taking them out to people's cars was something stores used to do. I quit my job at McDonald's because, although it was just as challenging, it was entirely indoors, and I was bagging groceries in January in Northern Ohio. Story 30. My first job was probably one of my worst. It was a cold calling firm that specialized in recovering mis-sold payment protection insurance. We would have to pressure people into going through a qualifying set of questions involving their credit history. Most people would hang up or tell you to go away. Sadly, the older, more vulnerable individuals were targeted. When I started, customers paid for this service upfront and then received a refund if there was no case to claim compensation from the respective banks. However, we had to stop taking money upfront because people were complaining to the ombudsman that they weren't receiving their refunds. It gets worse. As I mentioned earlier, vulnerable individuals were targeted. One day, I was on a call with an elderly woman in her 70s. She was clearly very confused and didn't understand what I was talking about. I quickly recognized this, told her to enjoy the rest of her day, and thanked her for her time. My supervisor came over and said, "What are you doing? That was a guaranteed sale. If you can't do your job, then maybe you shouldn't work here." This was said in front of everyone, not quietly either. I took off my lanyard, placed it on my desk, and said, "See you." I never returned. I then had to fight in small claims court against them because they claimed I worked fewer hours than I had and tried to underpay me in my final paycheck. I would name and shame the company, but they dissolved years ago. Story 31. I worked as an usher at a live entertainment facility, including orchestras, plays, rock concerts, and ballet. It was wonderful. I left because I ran away from home, hitchhiked south, and lived as an undocumented person for a few months before returning home. I was very dramatic at 17. Story 32. A teenager was sexually harassed by an older man while alone in the office. They decided to keep him on staff. I never returned. Story 33. I worked as a kennel technician at a boarding facility for dogs and cats for 2 years during high school. Although the pay was low, it provided valuable experience for someone aspiring to be a veterinarian. I was fired shortly after graduating. The owner's neighbor wanted his son to have an easy job, but no positions were available. Unfortunately, I received an unjust review based on the last hour of a pet stay, which was used as justification for my dismissal. I had enough savings to enjoy my summer, and I found a better job a few months later, but I am still a bit frustrated about the situation. Story 34. I was new in town, hopped a freight in Philadelphia, and ended up in Pacoima at the slaughterhouse where they took me on as a stun gun apprentice. I got to blast the heifers and bulls between the eyes with one of the devices that Anton Chigurh carried around in No Country for Old Men. I had just started to get into it when she showed up, giving me that come-hither stare like Mary and on Gilligan's Island, and I was captivated. I jumped the killing floor and shot through the swinging doors into the warm embrace of what I can only describe as the sexiest bovine goddess ever to chew cud. We are still together, staying out of the reach of the Millicents, and we shall forever roam the countryside, selling some milk when we run out of cigarettes and need to get our own place to make sweet love. Story 35. I was fired. I started when I was 18 and found a way to disable cameras, keeping them on loop 90% of the time. I guess they figured it out. When they fired me, they told me, "You know why?" There were about 50 reasons, so I didn't really question it. Shortly after, the company went bankrupt anyway. Story 36. I was a summer camp counselor. I loved it and worked there each summer through college and graduate school. I left after graduate school to pursue an actual adult job. Story 37. I worked as a custodian at a high school before moving for college. In my opinion, it was a great job for a high school student. The pay was decent, and I never had to work weekends. Most supervisors were flexible with students' after-school activities. I recommend this position to all teenagers seeking part-time jobs after school. Story 38. I was working in a supermarket until I lost my name badge. The manager said, "We can't use you without a name badge, so you are fired." Everything was wrong with the company, the management, and the way they let me go. I realized this a few years later. Story 39. I left a job at Subway because the assistant manager didn't like that the franchise owner hired me while he was on vacation, and he thought I put the meat on the sandwiches too delicately. Every time I touched a cold cut, he yelled, "This isn't art school. Slap it on there and move on." When I went back to get my first and last paycheck, he had dumped a cup of Pepsi on it. This was before the controversies surrounding Jared, so the entire store was decorated with large posters of him holding up tape measures and pairs of pants. I also remember a life-sized cardboard cutout of Jared right next to the register, which made the job even worse. Staring at Jared Fogel's unsettling eyes all day was creepy. Even then, the store was so neon yellow that it made my eyes hurt. I was a teenager, and this was maybe 20 years ago. I took the job for a college summer and eventually left to work at Walmart instead. Not that Walmart is the greatest place to work, but it was far better than Subway. Story 40. I left my job as a bag boy because they scheduled me for only 3 hours during peak times at a rate of $5 an hour. Additionally, I was falsely accused of stealing cigarettes from a customer I had assisted for 2 weeks prior to my resignation. Despite being only a few feet away from my manager all day, he did not believe me and did not consider that I had no place to hide a whole carton of cigarettes. Story 41. Video store clerk. It was a family-run business, and I got the job because all the family members had quit or been fired, leaving the owner without any staff. I walked in and was hired on the spot. I was let go when the last of his kids came back a few months later. Story 42. The entire place felt shady. The products we had looked pre-owned, with no cameras anywhere. You could take anything and no one would notice. I did take some items. We were packing and wrapping using old, ripped-up boxes from previous packaging. I was given jobs like testing old fans to see which ones we could sell on Amazon and putting dusty mattresses in order by size. I was even assigned to clean rubbish out of the back alley and place it in the neighbor's bin, which was at an Indian restaurant. I hated that. I left immediately. Story 43. I worked odd jobs for my uncle in the back of his business when I was 14. It was hard work and paid $2 under minimum wage, so I figured I had better prospects elsewhere. Story 44. Landscaping at my high school and a few homes around town was challenging due to hot summers and limited access to water. I often had to run home for a few minutes to hydrate. Living in a small town, no one sold reusable water bottles, and my household did not prioritize my efforts to save disposable bottles. The 5 cents from recycling was always considered more important than staying hydrated. I eventually switched to a waitressing position in a cool, dark motel. Dealing with difficult customers was much easier than coping with heat exhaustion and thirst. Story 45. Cleaning up restrooms at a music festival. The festival lasts for a week every summer. My next job was at a major audit firm. I worked there for 11 years. Then I fell in love and traveled the world with my partner. Story 46. I started as the strawberry girl at a family produce stand when I was almost 15. I left when I got a car and was able to drive to a better paying job. This was in 1985. Story 47. Car cleaner. The acid used to clean the wheels was harsh, and no personal protective equipment was supplied. Additionally, the atmosphere was very cliquish. Story 48. I was a dishwasher at a nursing home on weekends when I was 15. I worked 4 hours a day and then had free time. It was okay. I earned $2.50 an hour. I quit to work at Wendy's for more hours. Story 49. Chevron was part-time with poor pay and hours. I left for full-time work elsewhere, which had slightly less poor pay but still had unsatisfactory hours. Story 50. Busboy at a chain restaurant. It was a good job at the time and provided decent income for a young person. I left when I started an apprenticeship in electrical work. Story 51. My first job was a summer position that I left when school started again. My first adult job involved shipping electric boards for a small local company. I did not leave. I was made redundant due to the recession. I left my most recent job in my current career simply to secure better pay. Unfortunately, these days, the best way to achieve a pay rise is often to move to a different employer within the same field. Story 52. I worked in a restaurant. I quit because I was working more hours than the full-time staff while also attending college full-time. I was one of many people leaving within a few weeks of each other. Story 53. I am a 16-year-old registered clerk at a pharmacy and currently in high school. I worked 8 consecutive days, 8 hours a day after school. On the 7th day, I walked out and went straight to the local movie theater to ask my friends who worked there when I could start. They told me I could begin next week. I never called my old job back. Story 54. Outback Steakhouse. I was 16, so I couldn't be a waiter, so I worked as a host, busboy, dishwasher, and handled takeout. After a while, I couldn't tolerate the behavior of the customers anymore, so I quit and became a lifeguard at my local pool. Story 55. Construction cleanup at 5. I left that for a rough-in crew at 9, as I could haul 2x4s and use a skill saw then. 1960s Oklahoma. Story 56. When I turned 18, I was managing carnival games at an amusement park. I was fired after a month because a woman asked me to help find her autistic son, and I told her that she would need to ask security about that. The lady then emailed my company a week later to complain. I was informed that I was taking the job too seriously and that the child could have gotten hurt, though they left out the part about a potential lawsuit. I blame myself for that whole incident, but I wish people weren't so quick to assume that everyone working at an event can solve their problems. Story 57. Bagging groceries at a grocery store became a seasonal job when I enrolled in college. Unfortunately, I learned that seasonal employees must pass a drug test upon their return, and my first semester marked the beginning of my interactions with cannabis. Story 58. I left Burger King because I graduated from high school and moved to a new city. Overall, it was a fun experience. The management was good, and I enjoyed free food in a small town where I didn't have to deal with many difficult people. Granted, this was 25 years ago. Story 59. My first job was making milkshakes at Chibaga Chibaga. I left because the owner struggled with addiction and had unpredictable mood swings. I then found a job at a car wash where my friends were working and earned much better money and more tips. Story 60. My first job was plant sitting for my grandma's neighbor when I was around 11 or 12 years old. The neighbor even paid my cousin and me. I left the job because the neighbor returned to Happy Plants. We spent our money at the Family Dollar and bought lots of affordable toys. My first adult job was volunteering at a cat shelter last summer. It wasn't paid, but it was still a valuable experience. I left because I had to return to school that fall. Story 61. Making sausage. I quit because summer ended. My boss wanted to sell the company to me. Unfortunately, between his lifestyle and my poor estimation of the price of wholesale pork, I didn't think there was much money in it. I recently looked up the price of pork, and he was a multimillionaire living well below his means. I wish I had bought his business when I had the chance. Story 62. The first job I had was refereeing children's soccer games, but I was paid under the table, so I don't really count that. I quit because the parents became very rude about 6-year-olds playing recreational soccer, and it wasn't worth it. My second job was volunteer work at the Center of Science and Industry. I was there for a little over 3 years, but I don't consider it a real job because it was unpaid. I quit because I wanted to start earning money for my time. So I guess my first real job would be at Magic Mountain. I worked at the ticket counter, the play area, and eventually ended up in the dishwashing area of the buffet. I quit because it didn't pay much, and the kids started to get on my nerves. Story 63. I was 16, working part-time in a textile mill doing various odd jobs. The plant manager would often have me move or sort items as needed. One day, he told me to go outside in the rain and pick up trash around the building. I was upset and thought, I am not doing that. Looking back, I should have appreciated what he was trying to do for me, providing me with work hours to earn a paycheck. I just didn't want to do that kind of work in the rain since it would ruin my hair. I walked away without saying goodbye and found a full-time job at another textile mill within a couple of days. It was easy at the time. Unfortunately, just a few years later, almost all the mills closed down, and the jobs went overseas. Story 64. I worked at a produce greenhouse during a summer job in high school to save money for a drum set. I quit when I was able to purchase my drum set. Story 65. I began by taking art commissions, but my first official job was as an installer of radio electronic equipment and devices. It is an interesting job, though at times it can be exhausting. Story 66. I left KB Toys because I had finished disassembling the shelves on our last day. At least I got a pretty good deal on a lot of video games during the closing. Story 67. I was 15, working at the jewelry counter at Sears, and I became frustrated with women yelling at me to return items their husbands had bought for their mistresses. Story 68. I worked at a Nathan's hot dog restaurant in the summer of 1993 on Long Island. I cooked hot dogs and hamburgers, and every day I had to bring my dad home a knish with spicy brown mustard because those were his favorites. I left when the summer was over to return to high school, and I didn't want to smell like frying oil anymore. Story 69. I was a senior in high school working at Kroger and making minimum wage plus tips as a bagger. A quick reminder. Your bagger is the same person who cleans the restrooms. I hated that job. After noticing that women were promoted from bagger to cashier in less than 3 days, while men took about 3 months, and realizing that as a bagger I received nothing, no pay raise, no vacation, no seniority, no benefits, I decided to quit. My dad refused to let me quit, so I had a great time messing around until I got fired. What got me fired was that a friend visited while I was working. He saw me outside behind the store cleaning up some trash that didn't make it into the dumpster. We were hanging out, and there were some heads of lettuce meant for the dumpster, so we decided to have a little fun. He rolled down the back windows of his car and drove slowly while I tried to throw the lettuce through the window. The manager saw this and assumed I was throwing lettuce at a customer's car. I explained that he was just a friend and not a customer. The manager pulled out his soda and the receipt from his recent purchase, saying, "Yes, he is throwing lettuce at the car of a customer." So I was fired. We still laugh about that. Story 70. Office Depot. I worked there for nearly 10 years, about 7 to 8 years too long. I am grateful for the work relationships I built and the knowledge I acquired while working with some great people who knew a lot about customer service, sales, and printing. I took everything I could from that job to use in future positions. However, I became complacent, did not leave when I should have, and honestly set myself back a solid 5 years in my career because of that. Story 71. The pawn shop owner's son was released from prison and was a true white nationalist and racist. I had to pick him up from the halfway house every morning. He ran me over with a tractor, smashing me against the wall while I was trying to help him move a couch. I left and never looked back. It turns out that the same son discovered that the pawn shop would go to his wife and their new son. So he shot both of them, went to the retirement home, shot his father, and then took his own life. If I had still been working there, I have no doubt he would have shot me too. Story 72. Pizza preparation location. They were known for hiring people without scheduling them to prevent identity theft. Story 73. Collections for Discover Card. I left because it was too easy. In the 3 years I worked for the collection agency, I cleared over $100,000, which I used to pay for my college without any loans. Story 74. Bouncer. I knew the bartender there. I got fired because someone told the owner I was a marijuana smoker. The bartender was actually my marijuana dealer, but nobody betrayed him. Story 75. At my hometown amusement park, I obtained a junior work permit when I was 14 and then again at 15 for the summer. I didn't return the following year because they wouldn't provide an umbrella while working outside, and I got severely sunburned. I could also get a regular job at 16 anyway. Story 76. I worked making t-shirts with a talented owner who had impressive tattoos. The previous owner would give me $20 every day for lunch for both of us and always let me keep the change. I worked Monday to Friday from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. I didn't quit. Shady bookkeeping caused the business to go under. I loved that job. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.